Well, every relationship that we enter into, it marks us, some more than others. So your parents, I would imagine, would have marked you more than, say, your relationship with your mailman, unless you have a really dynamic mailman, right? Because, as I mentioned, every relationship marks us. Some relationships mark us more than others. So if you went to college, I would imagine you had professors that you don't remember their faces, you don't remember what they taught, you couldn't pick them up out of a lineup. But there's that one professor, for whatever reason, 20 years later, that she taught anthropology, and for whatever reason, she just marked you. And again, what we know is that every relationship marks us. Some relationships mark us more than others. And so the idea of babies are distracting, aren't they? No judgment. We welcome babies. So the idea that every relationship marks us, some relationships mark us more than others. What we know is this, is that there are some relationships, though, that don't just mark one part of our life. There are relationships that end up marking every part of our life, right? Amy and I, we've been married a long time. And most of that time we've been doing ministry together. And what that's meant is we've gotten to step into new seasons with young couples. Either they're stepping into a season of marriage, or they're stepping into a season where they're having young children. And what we're always reminded of is that spouse-to-spouse relationship, or that child-to-parent relationship, those kinds of relationships, they touch every part of our life. So, for example, if you have a friend who got married a few months ago, and you happen to run into him, and you're like, hey, how is married life? Chances are, or I hope not, he might say something like, well, married life's fine. I mean, it hasn't really impacted my life. You would not celebrate that, right? You would probably be like, dude, you need counseling, right? Because, I mean, you stood in front of God and everybody a few months ago, and you are being knit together by God, and that relationship should impact every part of your life. It should impact your finances and your intimacy and every Friday night, right? Because there are some relationships that mark every part of our life. If you have a friend who had a baby recently, and maybe you're a caring kind of person, you call just to check up on her, and you're like, hey, how is baby life? How is that? And if she says, you know what, my life is not any different than it was before, you'd be like, I'm not an expert, but I feel like you're doing it wrong, right? Because the moment you feel the responsibility, you feel the weight of another human being, you look in the mirror and you're like, I see myself different, I see the world differently, because that relationship between parent and child, it impacts. There's not a part of your life that goes untouched by that, right? And there's no relationship in which that should be more indicative than our relationship with God. Meaning, if you heard somebody say, I have a relationship with the God of the universe, but that doesn't really impact the way that I live my life. Like, I have a relationship with the one who started history and the one that has the power to end history, but that doesn't really change the way that I live, or the way that I see the world, or my money, or my sexuality. Like, it doesn't change anything. You'd be like, dude, you're crazy. And that's what James is going to get at today. If you're new to Hope City, we've been in this journey through the book of James for a while. And this is what James is saying. James is like, if you hear a person say things like, yes, I know the God of the universe. I am in relationship with the one who put the stars in place, and he named all of them, and he knows how many hairs I have on my head, or how many hairs I used to have on my head, or how many heartbeats I'm going to have in this life, but that doesn't really impact the way that I live. James would be like, you're crazy. You clearly don't have a relationship with that person then. Because he's like, if you have a relationship with the God of the universe, then it will change everything. It'll change the way that you see the world. It'll change the way that you treat other image bearers. It'll change the way that you spend your money. It'll change your ambitions and your dreams. It'll change often what you do with your life. And what James is going to do today, he's going to say this one profound thing. He's going to get right up in our business, and he's going to like, yeah, if you have a relationship with God, it will change the way you make plans. Think about that. What he's going to do, actually, he's going to say, listen, if you've ever said these 5 things, then he's like, then this sermon, this message, this little text is for you. In fact, he says this. If you say these 5 things, I'm just going to read them to you. If you've ever said, today or tomorrow we will go, meaning you plan to travel somewhere, into such and such a town, meaning you plan to arrive somewhere, and spend a year there, meaning you plan a certain amount of time there, and And to travel, or wait, what is it? To trade, meaning you plan to do something, and then I'm going to make a profit, meaning I've got an objective to my plan. He's like, if you've ever said those 5 things, then what you're about to hear is absolutely free. So let me boil it down. If you've ever said something like, I plan to go somewhere, spend a certain amount of time there, do something there, and I've got an objective for that trip. He's like, if you've ever said that, then this is for you. Now, heads up, James, if you haven't been with us, James has got an attitude. There is a sharp edge to his voice. But he's not angry, he's passionate. He wants you and I to live a life of extravagance. He wants you and I to live a life of abandon. There is no Christian life of 1 foot in the world, 1 foot in the spiritual life. It's, as Dallas Willard says, God is not interested in your spiritual life. He's interested in your life. And so James is like, I'm after all of it. Every seen and unseen place of your life. And so what James is going to do, though, he's going to insult us. That's kind of how he gets our attention often. And so at the end of this little passage, he's going to call us arrogant, which is an insult. Like there is no maybe greater insult for our time in life than for somebody to go, you are so arrogant. But what he's doing, the reason he calls us arrogant is because he's like, I just know how we talk. I know how you talk. Meaning, what James is saying is like, if you've ever said something like, I plan to go to law school and I'm going to get a law degree. James is like, you are arrogant. Well, I'm just going to lunch after church. James is like, you're wicked. I'm just going to go home then. James is like, evil. Why would he call us arrogant and wicked and evil? And the reason is that what James is going to do is he's going to say, I've got a problem with your words. I've got a problem with your words. And what he's going to do is he wants us to couch our entire life, not just our words, but our entire life with this little phrase. And the phrase is, if it is the Lord's will. Now, let me just give you kind of my experience. When I became a Christian, which I became a Christian out of high school, some of you know I grew up in a non-religious Jewish family, got radically saved, meaning I trusted Jesus, gave him my whole life in high school. And as I began to read the Bible, which is a good thing to do, and as I began to read the Bible, I eventually got to James, because it's like toward the end of the New Testament. When I got to James, I loved it. James is one of my favorite books. And what I found is that in places like this, it feels like James is a little nitpicky. Anybody? I mean, it just feels like where James is like, before you do anything, before you make plans, like say, if it is the Lord's will. And I'm like, really? Like I'm supposed to say that all the time? Like I'm going to go to the bathroom. Oh, my bad. I mean, if it's the Lord's will, I'm going to go tinkle. Like, is that what he wants me to say? And what I want, the little commentary I want to give is this, is that James does have an issue with our words. He does. But he doesn't have an issue with you and I making plans. He doesn't have an issue with you and I making a profit, clearly. But he doesn't have an issue with our words. But mostly what he has an issue with is our worldview, meaning the way that we see the world. And what he's going to get at is he's like, we see the world literally as our oyster. We're like, everything is mine. Every good thing out there, I should have it. I deserve it. And James is like, that's what I'm getting at. It's your entitlement. It's the thing that drives our entire life. And he's like, that's arrogant. And that's what he wants to get under. This is where we pick up. James chapter 4, beginning with verse 13, he says this. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit, yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? Now, I love that question. It's painful. What is your life? One of the reasons we have a problem answering that question, what is your life, is because a couple things. But one is we don't know what's coming, right? We cannot see around the corner. And this is why Proverbs 27 says this. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. Now, I know some of you are like, John, I mean, come on. That's just semantics. Of course, nobody can look into the future. Nobody's got a real magic 8-ball. Like, we don't know. We can't look around the corner. I get that. But isn't that just semantics, James? And James is like, I mean, maybe a little bit. But mostly, it's this cavernous reality that you and I have no control. You and I have no control over the next millisecond. You and I have no control over the next 10 years. You have no control over the next 20 years. You have no control. And what that lack of control should do, it actually should create a level of trust that God knows what he's doing. Let me put it this way. There's an old book. It's a good book, but it's an old book called The Survivor's Club. And it's a collection of true stories of how people survive like really terrible tragedies. And one of them is the story of Ellen. Ellen was heading to her knitting club on Thursday night. She gets in her car, drives to her friend's house. She gets out of her car with an armload of knitting yarn and needles and all the stuff. And she's walking to the door. She walks up the steps to her friend's house. She trips on the last step, and she falls at the door, makes a commotion. They run out. They open the door. They're all laughing at her. She's got a grin on her face. They help her up. And she walks in. She sits down in her chair. And at that point, they're all staring at Ellen. And she's like, I get it. Ha, ha, ha. It was funny. And they're like, no, look down. And one of her knitting needles punctured her breastplate. And it turns out it went into her heart. And so her plans for Thursday night completely changed. And they called an ambulance. Ambulance came, took her to the hospital. And the doctors put her in an x-ray machine. And it turns out the knitting needle had punctured her right ventricle. And so they took her into surgery. They took it out. She survived. A few hours later, the doctors come into her room. And they say, while we were looking at her x-ray, we also noticed an enormous lymph node in your breast. And you have late-stage breast cancer. So not only did her Thursday night change, but now the next year of her life changed because of radiation and chemotherapy. But what is amazing is she never would have known she had breast cancer if it weren't for that knitting needle that punctured her right ventricle. My point is this, is we have no idea. We have no control over what's going on. We have no idea what's coming, but what that should do is create a level of humility in us where we begin to look at every moment, no matter what the moment, look at every moment as a gift. Something's coming, and I'm not the one bringing it, but I know who is bringing it. And whether it feels like good news or not, the one bringing it is always good. And so it gives us a level of trust. But James asked the question, what is your life? And so he answers it with verse 2. With that in mind, he says, you are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. So he's like, our life is like smoke. I mean, this is the campfire season. The fire goes up, or the smoke goes up, you feel it, you see it, you smell it, you're like, it's real, but then it's gone. You take a shower, the fog from your shower gets on the mirror, you're like, it's real, but then it's gone for a minute. And James is like, yeah, that's your life. That's my life. He's like, you think you're a big deal? You're a big deal for about a half of a millisecond in the scope of life, in the scope of eternity. He's like, you have no idea what's coming. And that temporariness, listen to this, that temporariness should change the priorities of our life. The temporary nature of our life should change the priorities of our life. James is not making this stuff up, by the way. He's ripping this off his brother Jesus. Jesus tells one of my favorite parables in Luke chapter 12. Jesus tells us about this guy who is a really successful businessman. And the businessman is like, I'm killing it. I am making so much money. And you know what I'm going to do? Before I get old, before I don't have any more time left, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to cash out right now because I've got all these barns full of stuff and money, and so I'm going to cash out and I'm going to live my best life now, and I'm going to eat and I'm going to drink and I'm going to be merry. And Jesus tells that story, and then he says about this guy, he says to the guy, he says, beware, tonight your life will be demanded of you. Now we hear that, and honestly, and that hurts our feelings, because we're so entitled and we're like, that's not fair. And we put ourselves in his place and we're like, but I didn't know I was going to die tonight. And Jesus is like, but you did know you were going to die. And so we position our life in such a way where the temporariness of it moves our priorities. We have a cemetery behind our building. Which way is it? Excuse me. I only work here, okay? When we were given this property 3 years ago, and some of you don't know the story, but Hopewell Baptist, which was here for 200 years, faithful gospel witness in our city, second oldest Baptist church. And when they came to the end of their gospel journey, they, instead of just closing the doors, they gave it to another church. It was our church, Vineyard Community Church. And we moved over here, changed the name to Hope City Church. One of the things I was not excited about is that part of the 15 acres was also this plot of dead people in the back. And I was like, that is not a recipe for church growth. I was like, so I didn't love it. Honestly, I still don't love it. But I can appreciate it now. In fact, what I do now, sometimes some of you have caught me on pretty days, when I'm feeling fragile, or I'm feeling a little bit too big for my britches, or I need a gut check, I go out to the cemetery, and I actually have a metal chair hidden in one of those cypress trees. And I go out with a big cup of coffee. I stick it on Miss Patterson's headstone. Sorry, Miss Patterson. And I just sit there. And I out loud, I just say, John, this is coming. This is coming. And the reason is that our fragility should change our priorities. Our fragility should change our priorities. In fact, Psalm 90 is this beautiful picture, because let me back up. Jonathan Edwards, anybody ever hear of Jonathan Edwards? There's no good reason for most of you, but Jonathan Edwards is a key figure in the First Great Awakening, late 1700s. And Jonathan Edwards, he was a particular kind of person, and he had over 100 resolutions that he wrote over his life. These are things that I want to see happen in my life. Not goals, resolutions. One of his resolutions was this: resolved to think often of my death and the circumstances that surround death. Now, some of you might be like, that dude needs a pill. Maybe, but again, he's ripping this off of Psalm 90. He's ripping this off of Moses. Listen to what Moses said. Moses said, like grass that is renewed in the morning it flourishes and is renewed. In the evening it fades and withers. And because of that, verse 12, he says, teach us to number our days so that we might gain a heart of wisdom. Teach us to number our days so that we might gain a heart of wisdom. So our fragility, the temporariness, the mist that is our life, it should cause us to reorder everything in our life. Let's just do a little bit of an exercise here. I want you to think about one or two things right now that you spend an enormous amount of time doing, okay? It could be anything. Something that you dream about, that you love, you scheme about. You wake up in the morning, you're dreaming, you get with friends, you're starting to talk about it. I want you to think about one or two things that you dream about. It could be a business, it could be that new project at work, it could be that car that you just bought, or that thing you're saving up for, or like the goal of grad school, like whatever it is. I want you to think about that little ambition. And then I want you to just imagine tomorrow you get a diagnosis that you're not going to see 2024. Will those priorities change? I hope so. Now here's the thing. If you're new to church, welcome. Probably what you know is this, is we could have gotten right where we've gotten in this sermon by not reading the Bible. You don't have to be a Christian to agree with everything we've just said right now. We could have spent the last 2 hours watching The Bucket List. Morgan Freeman, Jack Nicholson, great movie. And you'd be like, yeah, life is short. Right? I could have played Wind Beneath My Wings, which is from my generation, Bette Midler, right? And we'd be like, life is short. We need to make our life matter. Now, this is where the distinction will come. If you're here and you're not yet a follower of Jesus, what we think a life that matters looks like will be different. And this is where James diverges. Because he's like, life is short, it's a mist. Make it count, and here's what he means by that. He says, instead, meaning now that you've seen that life is short, and you're evaluating what it means to make a difference, having your life matter in the scope of eternity, here's how I want you to think. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live, and we will do this or that. Now, here's the amazing news. This is going to blow your mind. It blew my mind when I was studying this. Here's what he's saying. He's like, the Lord does will. Meaning, if you're here today, it means the Lord wills. Meaning, you are alive right now. So the Lord does will. And you might be like, the Lord wills what? The Lord wills a purpose. Now, the reasonable question to be like, well, then, if the Lord does will that I am here right now, what is my purpose? Listen to what Moses says, because Moses thinks about this. Moses says this in Deuteronomy 30. This day I call the heavens and the earth as a witness against you, meaning your life has been weighed. God sees all of your actions, your motives, your talk. And the heavens are a witness against you. That I've set before you life and death, blessings and cursings. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him, for the Lord is your life. James asks, what is your life? And Moses says, the Lord is your life. Amen. How about this? Everybody just take out these two fingers. Don't rebel, just do it, okay? Just everybody put them right here. You should be feeling something. If you're not, we've got a bigger problem right now. There's a doctor in the house. So what you're feeling is your blood coursing through your body, your heart pumping it, bringing oxygen to your muscles and to your brain. And it's the reminder that you're not doing this. Someone else is doing this. You are not in control, meaning the Lord wills. For this, I can't talk about tomorrow. You might get in a tragic car accident on the way to work tomorrow. But just this moment, the Lord wills. What does the Lord will? The Lord wills a purpose. What is the purpose? Listen to the Apostle Paul, Romans chapter 14. It says, for none of us lives for ourselves alone, and none of us dies for ourselves alone. If we live for the Lord. And if we die for the Lord. So whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord. James asks, what is life? What is your life? Moses says, the Lord is your life. Paul says, the Lord is your life. And the question I want to ask today is, what is your life? When you see it clearly today, what is your life? Because there is no religious answer in this moment. You can't say, well, I go to church, or I do this, or, I was baptized when I was a child, or, I go through the catechisms, or I'm in Bible studies, or I've been a member of so-and-so church for 25 years. Like, it's not that. The only dividing factor is, what is your life? And either my life is the Lord's, or the life is my own. And it's pretty easy to tell the difference. Interesting, when Jesus was walking the earth, he never asked people to pray the prayer. Do you guys know that? I know, like, in sort of the evangelical circles, we're like, you want to become a Christian? Bow your head, close your eyes, pray this prayer that we made up. And I get it. Like, there's a reasonableness to, like, we're inviting people into a relationship, and so I'm not denigrating that the mechanism. But you actually never see Jesus do that. Jesus, he always was like, this is your life right now. follow me out of it. And you follow me into a new life. And you do that in front of everybody that's watching. And you do that in a way that's going to cost you everything that you've known. And I want you to follow me into something new, something dangerous, something beautiful, something extravagant. And we've lost the courage to do that today. But I think God is blowing a fresh wind in his church. I think he's giving courage to a new kind of disciple to say, I'm not just going to pray a prayer in secret and live a life in secret. No, this following of Jesus is going to impact every part of my life, and it starts today.